The spark is lit, the voices rise, you see the fire in their eyes. They throw a stone, they launch a dart, and aim it straight toward your heart. You want to hit back twice as fast to make sure that your word is last. But fire doesn't put out fire, it only takes the wreckage higher. So drop the shield and drop the blade, and stand within the light you've made. Arguments are funny things. We call them defending ourselves, but usually we're just building a prison of words. We think that if we talk louder, explain longer, or hit harder, we'll somehow win our peace back. But you can't win peace through war. When someone attacks you, whether it's at the dinner table or in the boardroom, they aren't just attacking your ideas, they are trying to disrupt your rhythm. They want you to scramble. They want you to get defensive. Because the moment you start defending yourself, you've already accepted the role of the accused. Today, I want to show you how to stop being the defendant and start being the authority. The very first thing you do when someone throws a verbal punch is nothing. You audit, you check your breathing. If you feel that heat rising in your chest, that's your body telling you that you've been overpowered. Don't speak yet, just breathe. Then I want you to use the most disarming tool in the human toolkit, agreement. Now, I don't mean you agree with their insult. I mean you agree with the fact of the moment. If someone says you're late and you're always so irresponsible, don't argue the irresponsible part. That's a trap. Just say, you're right, I am 10 minutes late. By agreeing to the undisputed fact, you've taken the wind out of their sails. You've refused to fight on the terrain they chose. You've narrowed the argument down to a single point, and you've done it with a calm that they can't touch. Most of us defend ourselves by over-explaining. We give 20 reasons why we did what we did. We provide a PowerPoint presentation of our intentions. Stop doing that. Explaining is the language of the subordinate. Instead, shift the burden of proof. If someone makes a wild accusation, don't prove them wrong. Ask them to prove themselves right. Look at them and say, help me understand. What specific evidence led you to that conclusion? Now, the pressure is off of you. You aren't the one under the microscope anymore, they are. While they are fumbling for an explanation, you remain still. You remain quiet. You aren't defending your character, you are auditing their logic. And usually, when people have to explain their anger, the anger starts to feel a lot like a mistake. When the argument gets personal, people will try to tell you who you are. They'll say, you're being difficult, or you're overreacting. Do not defend your personality. Defend your experience. Use the I statement shield. When you say, I feel frustrated when the conversation moves to my character instead of the project, they cannot argue with you. They can argue with your reasoning, but they cannot argue with your feeling. It is a closed loop. It is a boundary that says, this is my territory, and you don't have a map for it. It forces the conversation back to a place of respect because you've made it clear that your internal state is not up for debate. In the high-pressure moments of a verbal confrontation, the greatest threat to your authority isn't the words being thrown at you. It is the biological betrayal happening inside your own ribcage. Most of us view an argument as a battle of wits or a clash of logic, but before a single syllable is uttered, the body has already declared a state of emergency. This is the physiological reality of the defensive crouch. When someone attacks your character, your work, or your intelligence, your brain doesn't distinguish between a verbal insult and a physical predator. Your amygdala fires, your adrenal glands dump cortisol into your bloodstream, and your heart rate spikes. In an instant, your executive brain, the part responsible for empathy, logic, and long-term strategy, shuts down to save power for the survival brain. This is why, in the heat of a disagreement, you often find yourself saying things you later regret, or worse, losing your ability to speak clearly altogether. You aren't defending an idea anymore, you are reacting to a perceived threat to your existence. To master the art of defense, you must first master the emotional audit. You must learn to check your pulse before you check your opponent. The emotional audit is the practice of becoming a detached observer of your own nervous system. It requires you to create a micro gap between the moment you are insulted and the moment you respond. In that gap, you aren't looking for a clever comeback, you are scanning for symptoms. Is your throat tightening? Are your palms sweating? Is your heart pounding against your chest like a drum? If the answer is yes, you are currently compromised. Any words that come out of your mouth while your heart rate is above 100 beats per minute will be filtered through the lens of fear or rage. You will sound high, pitched, defensive, and desperate. By performing the audit, you gain the most important realization in communication: you cannot win an argument if you have lost control of your body. Authority is found in the ability to stay cool when the room is hot. When you identify that your pulse is racing, you realize that your primary goal is no longer to win the debate, but to regulate your system. Regulating your system is the ultimate low-stakes power move. While the other person is shouting or leaning in, expecting a reactive explosion, you are doing something invisible. You are taking a slow, deep breath into your belly. You are unclenching your jaw. You are consciously lowering your heart rate. This is the internal anchor that keeps you from being swept away by the other person's emotional storm. When you speak from a place of biological calm, your voice carries a resonance and a weight that a defensive person can never achieve. You move from a high arousal state of panic to a low arousal state of authority. In this state, you can actually see the flaws in their logic. You can see their desperation. You realize that their aggression is likely a sign that their heart is racing too. They are the ones feeling threatened. You are the one performing the audit. This shift in focus, from "what should I say" to "how is my body reacting," is the secret to unshakable confidence. It removes the victim energy from the interaction. A victim is someone who is at the mercy of their environment. A sovereign individual is someone who manages their internal environment, regardless of the external noise. When you refuse to let your heart rate dictate your response, you are taking ownership of the interaction. You are signaling to the other person and to everyone watching that you are the most stable element in the room. This stability is terrifying to an aggressor because it suggests their weapons aren't working. They're trying to provoke a reaction, and you are busy performing an audit. By the time you finally do speak, your words will be surgical, calm, and devastatingly effective because they are backed by the full power of a regulated mind. You aren't just defending a point, you are demonstrating a level of self-mastery that makes the argument itself feel small and unnecessary. You have already won the most important battle, the one happening inside your own skin, and from that position of strength, the rest of the conversation is simply a matter of logistics. In the heat of a verbal assault, the natural human instinct is to build a wall. When someone throws a criticism at you, your reflexive response is usually a total 100% denial of everything they've said. If they call you lazy, you list your hours. If they call you wrong, you shout your facts. But this total resistance is actually what keeps the argument alive. Resistance is the friction that allows the fire of a conflict to burn. When you fight every single word someone says, you are giving them a massive, sprawling battlefield where they can attack you from any angle. You become exhausted trying to defend 10 different fronts at once. To reclaim control, you must stop resisting and start filtering. You do this through the agree to the fact maneuver. This is the strategic art of looking at a complex, emotional attack, finding the one tiny grain of objective truth within it, and agreeing with it completely. By doing this, you aren't surrendering, you are narrowing the battlefield. You are taking a chaotic explosion of words and shrinking it down to a single manageable point that you choose to acknowledge. Most critics use a bundling technique. They take a specific fact and wrap it inside a thick layer of emotional judgment and character assassination. For example, if you missed a deadline, they won't just say you were late. They will say, "You're late again because you don't care about this team and you're fundamentally unreliable." The nice person tries to argue the don't care and the unreliable parts, which are subjective and impossible to win. The authoritative person, however, performs the maneuver. They look through the noise and find the one undisputed fact: they were late. They say, "You're right. I was supposed to have this in at 9, and it is now 10. Notice what happens in that moment. You have just robbed the critic of their momentum. They were prepared for you to make excuses or get defensive, which would have given them an opening to keep shouting. But when you agree with the fact, there's nothing left for them to push against. You have hit the reset button on their aggression by removing the friction. Agreeing with a fact is not the same as conceding the argument. This is where most people get it wrong. They think that if they admit to a mistake, they are losing their power. In reality, admitting to a mistake is the ultimate display of high-status authority. It shows that you are so secure in your value that a single error doesn't threaten your identity. When you say, "Yes, I did miss that detail," you are signaling that you are a person of truth. You are taking the fact off the table so that the conversation can move to the fix. It turns a character trial into a logistics meeting. By agreeing with the undisputed portion of the attack, you are effectively saying, "The facts are settled. Now, if you want to keep shouting about my personality, you're going to look like the one who is out of control." You have isolated their emotional judgment and made it look like the unnecessary extra that it truly is. This maneuver also acts as a powerful psychological mirror. When you calmly agree with a factual criticism, you force the other person to confront their own tone. If they are screaming, "You're a failure because you forgot the report," and you respond with a calm, "You're right, I did forget the report," the contrast is jarring. Their overreaction becomes the most visible thing in the room. You have stopped being the accused and started being the adult in the room. You are narrowing the battlefield to the only thing that actually matters, the specific behavior that needs to be addressed. Once the fact is agreed upon, the buts and howevers of their character attack usually wither away because they no longer have a factual hook to hang them on. You aren't being a doormat, you are being a surgeon. You are cutting away the emotional rot of the argument and leaving only the skeleton of the truth. This allows you to stay grounded and keeps the other person from ever being able to truly overpower you, because you've already stood on the only ground that matters, the truth. In the theater of verbal conflict, the person who speaks the most is often the person with the least power. When we feel attacked or accused, our survival instinct triggers a frantic need to justify ourselves. We launch into a defense presentation offering a mountain of evidence, excuses, and context to prove that we are right or that our intentions were pure. We believe that if we just provide enough data, the other person will see the light and back down. But in the world of power dynamics, over-explaining is a submissive signal. It communicates that you recognize the other person as your judge and yourself as the defendant. By trying to prove why you are right, you are implicitly giving them the authority to decide if you are. To break this cycle, you must employ the burden of proof shift. This is a fundamental reversal of social gravity where you stop providing answers and start demanding logic. You move from the defensive position of a suspect to the authoritative position of an auditor. The burden of proof shift works because it targets the structural weakness of most arguments. They are built on emotion, not evidence. Most people who attack you are doing so from a place of felt truth. They feel annoyed, so they accuse you of being incompetent. They feel insecure, so they accuse you of being arrogant. When you defend yourself, you are fighting their feelings with your facts, which is a battle you will never win. Instead, you must force them to translate their feelings into a logical framework. When someone makes a sweeping, aggressive claim like, "You never take this job seriously," or "This strategy is a total disaster," your job is not to list all the times you were serious or all the ways the strategy is good. Your job is to look at them with calm curiosity and ask, "Help me understand the specific data points that led you to that conclusion." This question is a cognitive trap for an aggressor, because their attack was likely based on a burst of adrenaline rather than a spreadsheet of facts. They will suddenly find themselves without a script. By asking for their logic, you are forcing their brain to switch from the emotional limbic system to the logical prefrontal cortex. This transition is exhausting and often causes the aggression to dissolve in real time. If they cannot provide the evidence, their attack is revealed as hollow noise. If they do try to provide evidence, the conversation is no longer an emotional dumping session, it has become a technical audit. In both scenarios, you have reclaimed control of the tempo. You are no longer the one under the microscope, they are. You have essentially said, "I am willing to consider your perspective, but only if you can prove it is grounded in reality." Furthermore, shifting the burden of proof preserves your status capital. High-status individuals do not audition for the approval of others. They assume their own competence as a baseline. When you refuse to over-explain, you are signaling that your actions don't require an apology unless a legitimate error is proven. It's the difference between a student trying to explain a failing grade to a teacher and a CEO asking a consultant to justify their recommendations. One is pleading, the other is presiding. When you ask, what is the logic behind that statement? You are sitting in the seat of the judge. You are telling the other person that their opinion is just that, an opinion, until they can back it up with a logical architecture that satisfies your standards. This technique also protects you from the exhaustion of circular arguing. In a typical argument, you defend point A, so they attack point B, and you spend the whole afternoon chasing their moving goalposts. When you shift the burden of proof, the goalpost stays exactly where you put it. You simply keep returning to the original request. I'm still waiting to hear the logic behind your initial claim. You become a logic gate through which they must pass if they want to continue the conversation. By refusing to be the one who does the heavy lifting of the explanation, you keep your energy intact and your authority unquestioned. You are proving that you are not afraid of their accusations because you know that without evidence, an accusation is just a noise. And you don't defend yourself against noise, you simply wait for it to stop. In the frantic heat of a verbal altercation, we are conditioned to believe that speed is safety. We feel a desperate, almost primal urge to fill the dead air. The moment someone stops speaking, or even before they finish, we think that if we leave a gap, we are appearing weak, slow, or defeated. But in the psychology of dominance, the exact opposite is true. Silence is not a void, it is a wait. When you master the strategic pause, you are employing the only defense that cannot be misquoted, twisted, or used against you. Most people who use insults or aggressive tones are relying on the bounce of the conversation. They throw a punch, and they expect you to catch it and throw one back. This back and forth creates a chaotic energy that masks the ugliness of their behavior. However, when you receive an insult and respond with 3 to 5 seconds of absolute, unblinking silence, you break the circuit. You refuse to provide the bounce. Instead of the argument moving forward into a blur of noise, you force the aggressor's words to hang in the air naked and exposed until the person who spoke them is forced to listen to the echo of their own toxicity. The strategic pause works because it shifts the discomfort from you to the aggressor. In social dynamics, the person most uncomfortable with silence is usually the person with the least status in that moment. By holding the pause, you are demonstrating a terrifying level of emotional self-regulation. You are signaling that you are not triggered, you are not scrambling, and you are not afraid, you are simply observing. This creates a status vacuum. As the seconds tick by 1, 2, 3, the aggressor begins to feel the weight of what they just said. Without your reaction to distract them, they are forced to confront the reality of their own tone. They often begin to fidget, look away, or most tellingly, they start to over-explain or soften what they just said. They might say, well, I just mean that, or don't take it the wrong way. The moment they start backpedaling to fill the silence you created, they have surrendered their authority. You have won the encounter without saying a single word. Furthermore, the strategic pause serves as a powerful internal reset. During those few seconds of stillness, you are giving your prefrontal cortex time to come back online. As we discussed in the emotional audit, a verbal attack triggers a survival response. By forcing a pause, you are manually overriding your fight or flight reflex. You are giving yourself the luxury of choosing your next move rather than letting your adrenaline choose it for you. This pause allows you to look past the insult and see the person behind it for what they are in that moment, someone who has lost control. When you finally do speak after a long pause, your words carry 10 times the weight because you weren't rushing to speak. The audience and the aggressor subconsciously perceives your response as being more calculated, more honest, and more authoritative. You aren't just reacting, you are delivering a verdict. There is also a profound mirroring effect that happens within the silence. When someone is aggressive, they are trying to pull you into their frame of chaos. By remaining silent and still, you are offering them a different frame, one of absolute composure. Silence is a mirror that reflects the aggressor's behavior back to them without the distortion of your defense. If they are shouting and you are silent, they look like a child having a tantrum. If they are being condescending and you are silent, they look arrogant and insecure. You are making their behavior the most visible thing in the room. You aren't taking the hit. You are letting the hit pass through you and strike the wall behind you. By the time you break the silence, the power dynamic has already shifted. You are the one who ended the pause, which means you are the one who now controls the direction of the conversation. You have proven that you are the master of the room's tempo, and that your voice is a choice, not a reflex. In the world of high-stakes communication, the person who can stay silent the longest is usually the person who gets the final word. In the heat of an argument, most people instinctively reach for the weapon. They say, "You were disrespectful, you were late, or you are being unfair." The problem with this approach is that it is a direct assault on the other person's reality, and the human ego is designed to defend its reality at all costs. The moment you say you, the other person's brain prepares for war. They will find a counterexample, a justification, or a way to flip the blame back onto you. They will argue with your facts, they will deny your observations, and they will litigate the history of the relationship. To break this cycle, you must employ the I statement shield. This is the strategic shift from defending your actions to defending your experience. While a person can argue with your version of the facts, they cannot, under any circumstances, argue with how you feel. By centering the conversation on your internal reality, you create a position that is psychologically unassailable. The power of the I statement lies in its inherent subjectivity. If I say, "You are being loud," I am making an objective claim about your behavior that you can immediately challenge by saying, "No, I'm not. I'm just being passionate." We are now locked in a debate about decibel levels and intent, a debate that has no exit. However, if I say, "I feel overwhelmed when the volume of the conversation increases," I am describing a private, internal state. You cannot tell me that I am not feeling overwhelmed. You might not like that I feel that way, or you might think I shouldn't feel that way, but you cannot deny the existence of the feeling itself. By using I as your primary shield, you are taking the argument off the battlefield of facts and moving it into the sanctuary of experience. In this space, you are the absolute authority. There is no jury, no judge, and no room for a rebuttal because you are the only witness to your own soul. This shift does something profound to the psychology of the aggressor. It removes their target. Most people who pick arguments are looking for a hook, a specific you statement they can snag and tear apart. When you refuse to provide that hook, their aggression has nowhere to land. If you say, "I felt sidelined in that meeting when my points weren't acknowledged," you aren't accusing them of being a bad leader, you are informing them of a result. It forces the other person to move from a defensive posture to a reflective one. They have to decide if they want to be the person who continues to cause that specific feeling in you. It changes the dynamic from a clash of egos to a disclosure of impact. It is much harder to be a bully when the person in front of you is calmly and clearly stating the emotional cost of your behavior. It makes the aggressor look like a villain, and most people, even the most overpowering ones, want to believe they are the hero of their own story. Furthermore, the statement shield protects you from the trap of gaslighting. Gaslighting occurs when someone tries to convince you that your perception of reality is wrong. When you defend your actions, they can attack your best. But when you defend your experience, you are standing on solid ground. You aren't asking them to agree with your effort, you are simply stating the reality of your discouragement. This makes you ungaslightable. You become a person who is deeply rooted in their own skin. This level of self-knowledge is a high-status trait. It signals that you don't need the other person to validate your feelings for them to be real. You are simply stating a fact of your existence. Using this shield also prevents the conversation from spiraling into historical litigation, where you both start bringing up things from 3 years ago. Statements keep the conversation in the now. They focus on the immediate emotional data of the room. By saying, "I am struggling to stay engaged in this conversation because of the tone being used," you are setting a boundary in real time. You are making your current experience the most important factor in the room. This forces a status check, where the other person must decide if they value the conversation more than they value their aggression. When you stop trying to prove that they are wrong and start showing them that you are hurt or uncomfortable, you are using the strongest defense in human history. You are using the truth of your own humanity, and that is a shield that no amount of shouting can ever pierce. In the final stage of any high-stakes conflict, the most decisive move you can make is the one where you stop moving altogether. We are often lured into the completion trap, The false belief that every argument must end with a resolution, an apology, or a mutual understanding. We stay in rooms where the air has turned sore, repeating the same 3 points while the other person repeats their 3 grievances, hoping that if we just find the right combination of words, the lock will finally click. But in the world of human psychology, there is a distinct line where a data exchange ends and emotional dumping begins. A data exchange is productive. It is 2 people trying to solve a problem. Emotional dumping is a power play. It is one person using the other as a trash can for their unmanaged shadows. To defend yourself effectively, you must master the sovereign exit. This is the ultimate defense because it is the total withdrawal of your most valuable asset, your presence. The sovereign exit is built on the realization that your attention is a reward. When you stay in a circular debate, you are effectively subsidizing the other person's dysfunction. You are telling them that they can be disrespectful, irrational, or repetitive, and you will still provide them with an audience. This lowers your status and drains your internal battery. To execute a sovereign exit, you must first develop an internal saturation meter. You have to be able to feel the moment the conversation has become a loop. When you hear the same insult for the second time, or when you realize the other person is no longer listening but simply waiting for their turn to vent, the data exchange is over. At that point, any further words you speak are just wasted breath. You aren't losing by leaving, you are winning by preserving the only thing that matters, your dignity and your time. The beauty of a sovereign exit is in its delivery. It is not storming out is a reactive, low-status move. It shows the other person that they have successfully gotten to you. They still own your emotions because they forced you to flee. A sovereign exit, however, is a proactive choice made with total composure. You don't wait for a gap in their shouting, you create one. You look at them with a neutral, almost clinical expression, and you deliver a decision statement. You say, "We have reached the point where we are no longer solving a problem, we are just repeating ourselves. I'm going to end this conversation now." Or, "I can see that you're committed to this tone and I'm not willing to participate in it. Let's try again when we can move forward." Notice that there is no apology. There is no, "I'm sorry, but," or, "I think maybe we should." You are simply stating the new reality of the room. You have closed the shop for the day, and you are the only one with the keys. Once the statement is delivered, the physical exit must be absolute. This is where most people fail. They say they are leaving, but then they linger at the door to hear the other person's last word, or they respond to the parting shot thrown at their back. The moment you respond to a parting shot, you have been dragged back into the mud. You have surrendered your exit. To be sovereign, you must walk away with a steady, unhurried pace, and you must not look back. Your silence as you walk away is the loudest thing you will say all day. It communicates that their words no longer have the power to tether you to the spot. You are showing them that you are a person of high value who has better places to be and better things to think about than a circular, stagnant argument. This technique is the ultimate defense because it leaves the aggressor alone with themselves. When you leave a circular argument, the other person is left holding all that toxic energy with nowhere to put it. Without you there to catch the dump, they are forced to see their own behavior reflected in the empty space you left behind. You have protected your nervous system, you have saved your time, and you have signaled to everyone, including yourself, that your peace is non-negotiable. You aren't running away from a fight, you are graduating from it. You are proving that the person with the most power is always the person who is most comfortable with the exit. By refusing to be a part of the chaos, you remain the master of your own internal kingdom, leaving the argument to burn itself out in the vacuum of your absence. The best defense in the world is the one you never have to use because you walked out of the room. There is a point in every argument where the learning stops and the earning begins. You have to be sensitive enough to feel that shift. When you hear the same point for the third time, or when the tone turns from seeking truth to seeking blood, you exercise your sovereign exit. You look at them, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of pity, and you say, "I value this relationship too much to let this conversation continue like this. Let's talk when we can both be heard." And then you leave. You don't wait for a reply. You don't look back to see if they're mad. You walk away knowing that you didn't lose the argument, you saved your dignity. Because at the end of the day, the person who keeps their peace is the only one who truly wins. Go out there, hold your ground, and remember you don't need to win the war to be the one who owns the peace. I'll see you in the next one.